I didn't get the conversation on camera at the coffee shop I stopped at in Brecon, but it went along the lines of how far have you come today? And I said, try Manchester. Oh, the look on the face, priceless. On Friday, I cycled 310 kilometres from Swansea in South Wales to Manchester in England. A distance that was just over the length of Wales, in fact. Now, not only did I decide to ride there, I also decided to ride home on the Sunday, because on the Saturday I was attending the Bespoke Cycle Show. And because I'd recently travelled up to north of England a couple of weeks ago in the van, I didn't fancy driving all that way again, which would take approximately 4 hours. I thought, I'm just going to ride there. There's something really cool about being able to get to a destination under your own steam, on 2 wheels, using your own current level of fitness. When I planned this route, I thought to myself, how cool would it be if I could time it so that I could ride there, which would take like 12 hours, maybe 13, 14 hours if you stop for lunch and things like that, and then ride back on the Sunday. A crazy idea, I thought, but one that would definitely make for a good story. And before we go any further in this video, guys, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. Getting really close to 30,000 subscribers now, and if you could like the video too, that would be truly awesome. And I would ask you to comment down below as well if you've ever thought about doing something like this yourself. Maybe it doesn't have to be as extreme as this, of course, but doing, or maybe something you have done as part of your cycling adventures. Now, going back like 15 years ago, and my local cycling club would do touring weekends where we'd ride like 80 miles out to a village. We'd stay in a hotel, we'd spend the night there, and then the next day we would ride back following a different route. But the idea would be exploring new roads that you wouldn't necessarily get to if you were on a training ride, because obviously you would do a loop. There was no time, there was no challenge to this, like riding to Manchester. It was just a case of we just need to get there. It doesn't really matter how long it takes us, and it also doesn't matter how long we stop for. But I want to talk briefly about the bike, because I was on my gravel bike, the Factor LS. Now, it's a slightly more comfortable bike. It's certainly so when I have my 40mm TerraTrail Continentals on there. I had about 65 PSI pumped up in those bad boys, which meant they were quite firm, but still far more comfortable than my racing bike with 28mm tyres on, especially as I had the Tailfin Aero Pack on the back as well. And that weighed in about 6 kilograms with everything inside, and that's including like shoes, cycling kit to ride home in, you know, jeans, a t-shirt, jumper, coat, sun cream, toothbrush, deodorant, some Haribos, basically everything that I needed for that 24-hour, 48-hour period. But actually it wasn't that much at all, but I was able to fit it all in there, no problem. I did have my electricals, actually, like charging cables and things like that, fitted into my Django Rolls front handlebar bag, which worked a treat as well, and I could store any rubbish in the little side pouches on that. Now, the Bespoke Bike Show was a really cool event, actually. There were lots of people, brands, showcasing a lot of hard work and thought that they've put into their products that they've designed, and some really quirky, unusual things there. Not to mention the very unusual zombie apocalypse bike building competition, where the folks were racing their bikes around the car park afterwards on an obstacle course. Like, fueled on adrenaline. It was a pretty nuts thing to spectate, but a memorable one nonetheless. Now, I was actually invited up to give a talk and share my experience from racing professionally to how I've changed my career a little bit to still racing, and you could call it professionally still, and also put in a lot more effort into, you know, doing this. So it was a great talk. I really enjoyed it. There's some fascinating questions, and one question I can actually use as a topic of conversation for this ride, or these two rides, because nutrition is often brought up, and on a ride as big as this one, we're going to spend all day on our bikes. Myself and Bryn, we're going to spend all day riding. And you'll be forgiven for thinking that we're going to be fueling on gels, energy bars, energy drinks the whole day. And that could be the case if we were racing, or if we were really pushing ourselves, you know, and riding at quite high intensities. But we weren't. It was a social adventure. And actually, we were stopping quite frequently. We were refueling at petrol stations. We were getting sandwiches, crisps. We would stop for lunch and have like ham and cheese toasties. We stopped for breakfast even. And we even had a McDonald's coffee. You've kind of got to make do. When you get out there and you're riding your bike all day, it's not so different to how you would fuel yourself on a normal day, where you would try and eat normal food. So our ride up to Manchester was an epic one. We were out ready for the sunrise and heading out over Cray, through the Brecon beacons. It's just stunning at sunrise. Heading out to Brecon, which was where we had our first proper stop. I think it was 8:30 a.m. We had breakfast. We have a ham and cheese panini and some coffee before heading out onto the main road down to Talgarth, onto Hay-on-Wye, and eventually through some really beautiful lanes heading towards Shrewsbury. And it was this section of the route which I was unfamiliar with. The first section I knew, first 100 kilometres. The last 100 kilometres, give or take, I knew. Spent a lot of time training and riding my bike in Cheshire. A beautiful place, but also incredibly flat. But it was the middle section around Shrewsbury I wasn't entirely sure about. But boy, did I love riding around there. Now, we made really good time because Shrewsbury was actually slightly over halfway distance, and we stopped for a cafe right on the riverside. However, no lunch was being served, so we just had a coffee. I had a pecan pie, and then we cracked on to the nearest petrol station where we had some lunch on a bin. After that, progress was pretty good going because it was relatively flat. Although I did make a mistake when we left Shrewsbury. We were heading in the completely wrong direction at one point. However, that was my fault, not my Garmin's. And I would say that the actual navigational features on my Garmin 1050 were spot on. The map, like the turn-by-turn directions, could not complain one bit. When we got to Manchester itself, the urban paradise, it was quite chaotic. It was about 7:30 p.m. on a Friday evening. There was lots going on, but we managed to pick our way through and get to a hotel. One that I had done a lot of homework on. There was breakfast included, and it was also right next to a cycle path, which would take us some way in getting in and out of the city. And the vibes after arriving in Manchester, I mean, you know, they were okay. We were sore, pretty sore. My backside, my legs, my feet, not my knees, my shoulders, my... So fast forward 24 hours and we make our way back home. We depart Manchester at 5:45 a.m. We make a quick stop for coffee at the McDonald's, literally a stone's throw away from the hotel. And we basically did the same route, but in reverse, with some slight tweaks, knowing that on the way up, we made some very questionable detours that I had to assure Bryn I wasn't going to make the same mistakes coming back. Thankfully, my route skills were on point, and we made it safely back to Shrewsbury. Now, Shrewsbury, of course, was probably about 180 kilometres to go until we got home. Now, Bryn wasn't feeling 100%, so he went ahead and booked a train, and I cracked on solo. It was a little bit lonely, I will say, and we did have a headwind for that full 300 kilometre return leg. I was a little bit sad I didn't have a wheel to sit on anymore.
Well, it's all happening now, everybody. I've got 130 kilometres left to ride. I've got like a 20-mile-an-hour headwind, and now it's just me. I've been treated to some fantastic scenery. Morale is okay currently. I've got plenty of Haribo on tap, plenty of water. If I can make it to Brecon before 5 p.m, then I'll treat myself to a coffee to get the last 60 kilometers done. And on top of all that, probably the most foolish thing is that I have a 1 Allen key size for my 2 axles. I do not have one to adjust my saddle, which is now slid all the way back. So I'm kind of riding like I'm on some 1980s old bike setup, really stretched out. We're gonna make do. By the way guys, the craziness of this whole ordeal is not lost on me. Like riding 310 kilometers to Manchester and then riding back 2 days later, yeah, it's not lost on me at all. But I've never done it before. I've ridden 300 kilometers, I've ridden 500 kilometers. It's actually my longest ever ride, just over that. But I rode from South Wales to North Wales. I'm back again. I was right on my tongue. I didn't want to drive all the way to Manchester, which would have taken about 4 hours. So why not ride? But I thought to myself, by the time we park and pay for fuel and drive, and it's been such a nice weekend as well, you know? It's really worked out. So take advantage of that fitness, you know? Take advantage of that opportunity that you might never get again. I might not ever do this. And it's been worth it, I think. If you were to ask me which is my favourite part of this whole 300 kilometers, I would have to say riding through areas like this, just south of the Shropshire Hills and just north of Hay-on-Wye. We're technically in England, but we're almost on the border between England and Wales. For a start, it's very green. I felt like riding into Manchester a couple of days ago, it felt like an anticlimax because you couldn't relax as you finished the ride. You were just hyper focused on making sure to stay safe and also going the right way as a visitor. As I'm heading back, you know, I'm heading back to rural Wales, I'm heading back to countryside, and this part is what I really enjoy. These sort of roads, the narrow lanes with no divide. It's almost like it's one way. It's not, but obviously, you know, they're so narrow. I really enjoy going past these houses and places like that. You know, like these gardens that people have in their homes are just amazing. Like old windows, you know, like buildings that have been up for, you know, 150 years possibly. And the other thing as well, obviously, I love climbs. This route is actually incredibly flat, about 2,500 meters of elevation gain in 300 kilometers. It's so funny, but most of it comes towards the end, you know, as I'm going home now this way. And I can see in the distance in front of me Gospel Pass, which is an incredibly high and long mountain pass on the border of Wales and England. And it's just nice to be able to see something in the distance. And likewise with Pen y Fan, as I get towards Brecon now in a couple of hours. And it was the same, you know, a couple of hours back in that direction with the Shropshire Hills, Church Stretton, places like that. Like, lots of things to see, lots of things going on. And it's not that I dislike, for example, heading into Cheshire. I know the roads there like really well because I used to ride them a lot, but they're really flat, and although great for morale, just not what I enjoy the most. This is what I enjoy the most. Well, there we go, 300 kilometers, 12 hours, and it's much easier to tell you what doesn't ache rather than what does. I think my head is the only thing that doesn't ache. I don't have a headache. Everything is sore. I've got calluses and like rough hands, and I'm covered in like I don't know, like salt and gudge, goodness knows what. But I wouldn't have traded that weekend for anything else. I really enjoyed it. So thanks to Bespoke for inviting me along, and Bryn too for your company, of course. Thank you guys for watching this video. Now, get me something soft to sit on. I'll see you in the next one.